to the open side. Karim Bete. Up the goal here to Samu, who's quick. Pete Samu looking for Karim Bete. Back to Samu. Oh, that is wonderful. That is wild. That is amazing from the Wallabies.
Welcome to Pick and Drive Rugby, we're the People's Podcast, providing a platform for rugby lovers to come together and support the game that's played in heaven. I'm your host, Ando. With me is Mitch and Lockie, and tonight we will be covering the Super W semi-final action. Super Rugby Pacific Round 10, match of the round, which is the Hurricanes versus the Brumbies, and I'm very excited to get into it. Lockie, we're going to start with you. How are you? How good is it being a Reds fan in this moment?
Oh, hello, gentlemen. It's a fantastic day to be a Reds fan. It's not often we see ourselves with 2 wins on the weekend, but I'm a very happy man. Have to admit, nervous moments in both games, and I can't say they were the prettiest wins, but I will take them, especially the girls. It is huge to be in a Super W final up in Townsville this coming weekend, and condolences to you both. I thought you'd be there, but next year, maybe next year, gentlemen.
It's devastating. It is definitely devastating. Mitch, we had an ugly win on Friday night that we've already done the instant reaction pod to. How are you since then? Have you kind of got over the frustration of the Waratahs loss today?
I think I'm wearing it a little better than you are, Ando. I didn't actually get out to the game. You did, and before we hit record this afternoon or this evening, you were very upset with the result, and so rightly so. I think we were both pretty confident going into that game that the girls would get the job done, and credit to Lockie. Lockie did say last week in our preview that, you know, you can't discount this Drua team, and they showed up this week and they got the chockies and they've kicked us out. So unfortunate afternoon.
Mate, you know what? Okay, I'm not going to get into my rant now. I'm going to save it for when we get to that section of the pod. And let's just get off this topic quickly. Otherwise, I'm just going to explode a little bit. So, Mitch, why don't you quickly take us through our tipping results and where the competition is at this point in time?
Yep. So well done to Dan G or Jojo Rabbit, who's still in first place on 48 points, followed very closely by Paul F or S Blanco, second place on 47 points, followed by Stephen P or Fish and Chips. And I think Stephen P's moved up in the ladder. I don't think he was there last week in third place. So well done to Stephen for taking out third place. It's very tight up the top there, as you can see. 116 points is the margin for Stephen P with 101, both shared by Paul F and Dan G. So it's pretty tight there. And I think, Lockie, you were saying before we hit record as well that you forgot to put some of your tips in this week and you've jumped from 8th place down into 70 somewhere.
Not over that period of time, but I am notoriously bad at submitting my tips in, and got there Saturday morning, forgot about the Friday night fixtures, and I have slid from 8th all the way down to still a strong 70th when I'm looking at your team, Mitch. But in the grand scheme of things, I've got a long way to climb back up. So maybe this time I'll actually remember to get him in and see if I can challenge wherever Ando's sitting. What are you, 18, 19 these days?
I think I'm 23 or 4 or something. So still taking that top 25.
I like how it readjusts every time you move up or down.
Yeah, I know. Top 30, top 40, top 25, whatever it needs to be for me to be top. Yep, that's it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we'll quickly go through our 2 simple calls to action that we always have. Firstly, join our Discord community to be a part of the best Australian community going around. The link is in any of our social media profiles. Get there to get your rugby fix. Now, lastly, please consider going to ko-fi.com/pickanddriverugby and supporting us with a one-off or a monthly payment. We do this for love, not money, but every little bit counts. So thank you very much. And without any further ado, let's get into the Super W semi-final and Super Rugby Pacific Round 10. Let's go.
All right. We have had some semi-final results for the Super W over the weekend. Both of these games played this afternoon in Sydney Concord Oval. And you were lucky enough to get out to watch the Waratahs and Fiji Drua game. Didn't manage to get the Queensland Reds game, but we'll start with the first one. Final result was 17-20 to the Drua, so they have seen themselves into the grand final next week at Townsville. What were your initial thoughts from this game?
Oh, look, I was incredibly frustrated. It's Super annoying that the Waratahs kept their worst performance of the season to the semi-final, so they now get knocked out, which absolutely sucks. And I think they're going to be incredibly disappointed. So they scored 17 points within the first 15 minutes of the game, and then were fairly. I don't want to be too harsh because I'm frustrated, so I don't want to say something now I'll come to regret. But they were full of errors and inaccuracies that they're going to be really frustrated about. And what I was going to say at the beginning, which I held off on, but I actually think this was to an extent less about the Fijiana team winning and more about the Waratahs losing. And that's genuinely with all respect to the Fijiana team, because the Waratahs have been far and away the best team in the Super Rugby comp this year.
Lockie, what are your thoughts on that statement there by Ando? Do you think that this game was more of a loss by the Waratahs, and that the Fiji Drua didn't not deserve the win, but probably weren't the best side on the day? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I think there's a little bit of salt there from Ando, but I'd have to agree. It can be both. It can be both. So, yes, it definitely wasn't the Tars' best performance, and I would say it was their worst. But they were off their game and they were rattled, not from the start, but from that 15, 20-minute mark when they had a 17-point lead and things went pear-shaped. You don't get rattled off your own accord. You get rattled because the team pressures you. And the Drua made sort of mincemeat of the entire New South Wales structure because of the pressure that they were able to exert at ruck time. If you go through, or if you were lucky enough to watch it and see the way that the momentum shifted, their ruck speed was phenomenal throughout that second part of the first half and for the rest of the game. And they really sort of turned the speed of the game into almost a frenzied pace. And that's what works for the Drua. And I think the Tars fell into the trap of trying to play that game, and ultimately they've gone down to their bogey team and they've got a 1-3 record against them now, which speaks volumes to the pressure that Fijiana can create on teams.
And Ando, in the regular season, the Waratahs did get... Okay, no, you keep going.
I would argue slightly against that, insofar as, the Drua did bring that up-tempo style that we know they're going to do that. Their offloads are ridiculous. I think I was reading in the match program, you can look at the overall stats for the season, and when you look at offloads, the Fijiana team have 112 offloads across the season, and then 53 is the next highest. So they're more than double any other team in the competition. In fact, if you add the next two teams together, Fijiana still have more offloads than them, which is a fun stat to look at. But in my mind, the reason why the Waratahs, in some ways, you could say got sucked into playing that style or weren't able to cope with it, was because their set piece was so inaccurate. And it's not a case of getting pushed off their own ball on the scrums. They just couldn't throw a line out straight to save their lives. They must have thrown about 4 or 5 not straight line outs across the course of the game, which meant that they just didn't get front foot ball in the Fijiana's half. And so they found it really, really hard to defend. And look, credit the Fijiana team, the number 8, Sarima Lewanakila, I think that's it, and Maruai Kumu as well. The 12 were excellent, really, really strong in the carry and hard to put down. And then number 3, Vuanamasi Rasolea, is an absolute mountain of a woman and just absolutely incredible. It takes 4 people to put it down. But I said a lot there. I just think it was more the lack of set piece accuracy was a thing that stopped the Tars from getting the possession and platform that they needed. So in that way, that's why I'm saying that they lost it rather than the Fijiana team winning it.
And like we saw in the regular season that the Waratahs got a pretty dominant result against the Drua the first time they played them, only a few weeks ago. What changes did this Drua team make this week to really push the Waratahs so far and ultimately get the win at the end?
2 things come into it, I believe. The first is the direction with which their attack is pointed. So rather than the standard Drua from what we've seen this season, which has been quite lateral and looking to go wide and around and use their wingers, they actually trucked it up a lot more directly. So they looked to Rasolea, who had a massive game. I'd say she was the best on ground, and they're bigger players, and they really punched through the inside channel, and they did that really effectively before they looked out wide and they used that offloading game. So I think that direction came part of it. But also, I've got a funny feeling, and I'm not sure the Tars would enjoy me saying this, but I think they already had one eye on next weekend from the manner in which the whole competition has been framed and the direction where we've been talking about Queensland and New South Wales, these two Titans. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a couple of people shaking their heads back at Tars HQ thinking maybe we didn't look at this semi-final as keenly as we needed to, because I think complacency might have been some part of that undoing.
It's an interesting point you raise. We spoke with Emily Robinson last week around the prep that the team had made for this game, but also just the way that they had sort of structured their season. And not to sort of to say that she was falling into the trap of doing that. She definitely didn't come out and say that they were expecting to win or they were coming in as favourites. But she did make a few comments around, we're looking forward to being able to see the second game and see who we get to go up to Queensland and belt the next week. So there was not confidence, but at least belief in their own ability to get the game won, which ultimately they didn't do. I found it interesting to see, even on the sideline, there was a few shots of her sitting on the bench that the camera panned to her in the last 5 or 6 minutes, about 2 or 3 times, and she just had her face in her hands the whole time. Like, she looked really nervous, really was like almost couldn't believe that the Drua were ahead at that point and that the team were sort of struggling to get that momentum back.
Yeah, for me, I'll just jump in there and say I wonder as well if some of it comes down to inexperience. Like we did speak with Emma about a lot of the changeover within a personnel and a squad and some of the inexperience that's within the team. I mean, she's 16 years old, but Caitlin Halsey had probably her most error-strewn game that she's had this season. Couple of knock-ons, unfortunately got the ball kind of dislodged as she's going in for a try. A few mistakes crept into a game that she hadn't demonstrated previously, and they seem to compound within this match. And a few other players as well perhaps weren't as composed as they might want to be as well. So look, this is a team that genuinely has been in transition this year. And they came up against a Fijiana team who, as Lockie correctly pointed out, had changed their approach and seemed to obviously pay dividends for them. And they deserved the win. Definitely have some gripes about the final turnover that they got that led to the bloody last attacking raid from the Waratahs getting stifled. Definitely got some salty thoughts about that, but in the end, I genuinely think the better team on the day won. And as hard as it is to say, I think they did. So best of luck to both them and the Reds in the final next weekend in Townsville.
Well, that segues us very nicely into the second game of the afternoon, and that was the Queensland Reds hosting the Brumbies in Sydney, if you call it hosting at all. 23-22 was the final result there. Lockie, as you sort of said in our intro today, you're pretty happy with the result there by the girls. What were your sort of thoughts of the game? Probably a little bit closer than a lot of us sort of expected from this second semi-final.
Oh, I don't think it was nearly as heart-wrenching as I needed it to be for my own health. I was a bit stressed, as you can probably imagine, sitting there with my partner and a housemate, watching the final 10 minutes and the penalties go either way and praying that Karis Dallinger could kick because I didn't know if she could from her Super Rugby Picky season. Really, I thought that when Ceci Smith went down and had to come off, I thought we were in a bit of trouble because I've yabbered on about her heaps this season, but she has been that focal point of the attack and our kicking structure as well. And I was really worried about how we'd go without her, without Brianna Dascombe, but our backline pulled it out of the fire. Another huge shift up front from people like Brianna Cheatham and Annabelle Cody. Shannon Parry played through what looked like a wrist injury at the end. And some very nervous moments, but we did get there. And I'm very relieved and very glad that we get that opportunity. But also, there is a part of me that wishes, just a tiny part, that wishes the Brumbies were able to get through to a maiden final as well, because we have seen such a good season. And wouldn't that have been a story to add to what's already been their best season by far, Ando?
Yeah, without a doubt. And look, I find it really convenient that you've managed to get through that bit of a recap without mentioning the absolute farce that it was the final penalty that won you the game. The fact that Grace Kemp got called for a no arms tackle when she's clearly wrapping her arm was just ridiculous. In defense of the referee, the player was falling, and it's a high stakes
See,
moment.
I thought that tackle
I've
was
never done it
penalised
before, so I'm
against
sure the
Martha
adrenaline's
Fua.
going to.
I didn't realise that tackle was against Grace Kemp.
I thought it was against Grace Kemp. Please, ladies and gentlemen, correct me if I'm wrong. I thought it was Grace Kemp that got pinged because I thought it was for the player falling into Kemp in the tackle. Maybe I'm wrong though. So if it wasn't against Grace Kemp, then maybe it's okay. But if it was against Grace Kemp, it's completely wrong.
Endo, what were your thoughts on this Brumbies performance?
Mitch, you going on?
Yep, throwing it back to you.
Oh, look, I thought that they were really impressive insofar as they knew where the strengths of their team lay, which was in the forwards work and the organisation of their mauls and the like. I mean, classic Brumbies, am I right? But basically just getting some really good pay from their forward pack, both off the back of a line-out maul, and then Grace Kemp just barging over and shoving away a winger in a scrum half to get over the line, being absolutely impressive in that moment too. She's basically fast become my favourite Waratah Super W women's player. She's absolutely barnstorming off the back of a ruck. Absolutely love it. So look, I thought the Brumbies did really well, but Lockie, how have the Reds been hiding Helena Young for the last little while? Why isn't she getting headlines absolutely everywhere? She was incredible. The pace that she has, she must be up there as the definitely fastest acceleration of any Super W player in a competition.
I warned you last weekend. She's got gas. That try against the Drua and the runs at the start really sealed it, but she was the difference. Really, when you look at it on paper, the way that she was able to get through, especially her first try through 4 players, and she shook off Biola Dawa, who is no slouch, by the way, on the left wing for the Brumbies, and she just scooted past her. So, I mean, if you look back, she's a sprint champion from what I've been able to see in Fiji. Wouldn't be surprised at all if the Aussie Sevens haven't got her on the radar already, because can you imagine her tearing up a Sevens field in gold? She'd be unstoppable. So clearly a huge strike weapon for the Reds going forward. Plus you've got Ivania Wong on the other wing, an established Wallaroo. So really that wing pairing is probably the most potent. And that's a big compliment when you look at the wing quality that we've got, the likes of the Tars, Desiree Miller, Maya Stewart. You've got plenty of talent across the board in the wings of Australia, but Helena Young is quickly becoming that person.
Well, that's a nice little segue. And why don't we move across now to the Super W final, which is happening next Saturday afternoon, 4:45 p.m. kickoff on Saturday, the 6th of May. This is being played before the Waratahs and Queensland Reds game in Townsville, the Super W game. So in a lot of ways, this favours the Queensland Reds team a lot, being somewhat a home game for them. Lockie, do you think that playing this in Townsville gives the Queenslanders that extra edge that may see the deciding factor in this final against Fijiana?
Aside from the fact that it's still in Queensland, it's an away game, isn't it? I mean, it's not like the Reds girls have been training up in Townsville, sweating it out, popping over to Maggie Island for a scoot around and coming home. It's still an away game for both teams. So, yes, there's going to be some Queensland colour in the stands. You'll see your local Fijian population hopefully come out in Townsville and support as well. So I imagine it's going to be vocal. And if there's any crowd coming through to that Origin-style game, I'd certainly like to hear them go for Queensland. But I still think they'll go in as favourites. The Reds, you'd have to think off the back of really strong season with the 4 wins, going down to the Tars in regular play by a point and coming through against a really tough Brumbies semi-side. You'd think that they're favourites, but we thought that about the Tars in the semi as well. So flip a coin. I'm going to go out on a limb and say Reds by 10. But if the Fijiana come back and, pinch another final win, are we going to be that surprised, Ando? Probably not.
No, probably not. And my concern for the Reds would be their capacity to be able to front up to the Drua if they play direct running game from their big forwards again. I'm not sure how some of the Fijiana team are going to be able to back up in kind of the 7-day window as well, because we already spoke about like the shift that Rasalia and Lewanakila put into. Not sure how they'll be able to turn around in that time frame. But if the Fijiana team are able to play that really direct play, suck the Reds in and get that space for their backs to be getting their arms free for the offloads, it's going to be a very, very tough day out for the Reds. So personally, I'm going to go the Drua by about 10 to 14. Partly also so that I can claim at least we lost to the eventual champions.
So salty, Ando. So salty.
I love it.
I do wonder
Yep.
if the conditions are going to play into the Drua's hands a lot more than the Queensland Reds. We've seen that even in Super Rugby Pacific, that when the men's team has played some games earlier on in Townsville when it was hot and sticky, that they struggled with the humidity and they struggled with the ability to kind of keep the ball under control and just the level of sweat that got on there and how slippery it got. And I think that's the kind of style that this Fijiana team is used to. They've had their preseason in Fiji. They know what these conditions are like. Not saying the Reds aren't familiar with those conditions either, but I do think, like Lockie was saying as well, there's a pretty big Fijian population as well in Townsville. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of people turn up and give them a lot of support as well. So as much as I'd love to see the Reds get the victory and have another Aussie team be the champions of Super W, I think this Fijiana team has shown this week that you can't really bet against them. So I could see either team winning. I'm going to sit on the fence here. I'll let it go.
Make a pick.
I'll go with Fiji then, but I'll say only,
you have
only
to.
by 3.
You have to.
It'll be tight. I don't think there's going to be a 10-point score in it.
All right. Absolutely love it. Well, why don't we move on then to the Super Rugby Pacific Round 10. Now, something that I didn't say at the start of the show is that we also have a post-match interview or recording with Izzy Parisi, which is going to be attached to the end of this podcast. So, ladies and gentlemen, stick around for that. It was conducted just after the post-match press conferences with the Waratahs. So, going through the results from the weekend, our match of the round will be the Hurricanes versus the Brumbies. So we're going to pause and not talk about that match now, even though it was the first game of the weekend, with the Canes winning 32-27. Next up, we had the Waratahs winning. I'm so used to saying losing. How great. Winning against the Highlanders 21-20. Now, Mitch, you and I both did the instant reaction pod, so we've spoken about this game enough, but Lockie, I'm going to throw it across to you. Just in a broad sense, what were your takeaways from this game? I mean, it's not often that you get a Kiwi team coming straight up.
Yeah, look, it broke up a little bit there at the end, but for mine, the main takeaway was how influential Aaron Smith is to any rugby side he plays in. We saw him come on and totally control proceedings, and with 10 minutes to go, maybe even less, he's pulled. And the Tars are able to jag a win. They're able to grind out. The Highlanders lose that structure. They lose that calm, and Falau Fakataga gives away that key penalty towards the end that gives the Tars the position. So to my mind, I'm still reeling at why they've pulled Aaron Smith, and you saw that he was sorely missed against the Force, and he's, again, in those dying minutes when it really mattered, he was really missed against the Tars. But I've got to give it to New South Wales. I'm so glad, and you'll rarely hear me say this, but I'm so glad New South Wales got a win. It's great to see. I've had my mini campaign to get the Highlanders out of the finals contention, and it's excellent to see a Kiwi team get knocked off at Allianz. But you did it the hard way, and the relief that I saw, and you've probably mentioned already, but the relief I saw on Jake Gordon's face after full time just about says it all. They did everything they could to lose that game and just managed to jag it at the death. So it's keeping their season alive, which is great to see from an Australian rugby perspective.
I think one of the things that's come out on social media since the game's finished, and we spoke about Hooper in our instant reaction after the game, and we thought he performed well. We thought he had a good game. But a lot of people are questioning that. So now that you've had time and the game's finished and we've had time to review and to think about it, maybe I'll get Lockie to jump in and answer this first. But do you think Hooper played as pivotal role in this game and was as good as we initially thought he was after the game?
I think he was influential. I don't think that he was the defining factor for the win. I think sheer bloody determination and a fear of losing more than anything else at the death got the Tars over the line. But Hooper had one of his better games of the season. I think we all recognise that he started fairly slow and has built into it well. But he's a class act. He's been able to put a decade of really consistent high-level Super Rugby together. I don't think we should be surprised that he's out here putting in really solid performances, and it's rare to see him give less than a 7 out of 10, and he definitely went above that to my mind against the Highlanders.
Yep.
Well said. And Mitch, any further takeaways before we move on, considering we've had an extra, say, 20 or 36 hours in which to process the win?
Oh, I think we didn't really mention Mahi Veilanu in our instant reaction pod, and I think going back and watching some of his involvements late was quite pivotal too. Just the way that he was able to find the try line at the end there. Hooper, in his post-match interview, put a lot of credit to him and said that he tried to go for the winning try and was pushed back, and Veilanu was the one that was able to get over the line there. So I think he's having some good involvements, and the more game time that he gets, Parecki's been really good for the Tars this season and is the form number 2 for the Wallabies at the moment. But Veilanu is having good impact off the bench, and it's a tricky decision there, I guess, for DC to kind of manage both minutes and make sure that he's getting enough. And also we've got a player like Tolu Latu on the bench or snipping on his heels too, who warrants game time as well. So it's good to see that, I guess, that competition for the hooker spot for the Waratahs at the moment.
Well, moving on to the next match of the week, and was the Fijiana Drua versus the Blues, and this was played in Lautoka as well in Fiji, which is very exciting. A slippery game. Many teams have gone over and suffered quite ignominious defeats. The Blues did ring a few changes throughout their team, but their backline was pretty much first choice, and they came away, like I said, with a convincing 14-30 win. We then had Moana versus the Rebels. And Moana, despite a very fast finish to this game, scoring a couple of late tries to definitely bring the game into. I think there was one try separating teams, and then the Rebels got a breakaway in like the 80th or 79th minute or something like that against the runner played to secure the win. This consigns Moana to their 9th consecutive defeat when you include the bye as well. So 9 defeats on the trot. Mitch, what do you think's going on here with Moana? Is it the fact that they're not able to have as many home games in Samoa or Tonga as, say, the Fijiana team or Fijiana Drua team are? What is it that's causing them to struggle so much in 2023?
I think there's a few factors when you consider the fact that when they play their home games in Auckland, they're getting, like, it looks like about 4,000 or 5,000 people turning up to support them. So they're not getting that home crowd advantage. You also look at the roster that they've got. It's pretty similar to last year. And not to say that their roster last year wasn't good enough for Super Rugby, but it's a pretty inexperienced team. And they haven't added a whole lot of talent on that. Yes, they do have the talents of Tavita Nawai and Levi Amua. Those guys are having incredible performances for a team like Moana, but those guys alone aren't enough to kind of get them victories against the competition they're coming up against week in, week out. They probably need another 2 or 3 players of that level to really start to challenge other teams. And at the moment, I just see that there's a skill gap between them and the other teams in the competition, particularly the ones lower down on the table closer to them.
And Lockie, coming into the final couple of minutes, the score was 33-38. And the Moana team had just pulled back 2 5-pointers, 2 tries, both of them converted. So they pulled back 14 points since the 73rd minute. How do you think the Rebels players were feeling after what happened both against the Blues and I think it was the Crusaders, giving away massive second half lead? How do you think the Rebels were feeling in that moment?
Bit of Groundhog Day, wouldn't it? Feel like that. It's a really unfortunate thing to be branded with that tag of second half faders. And I think the Rebels really were at risk of completing that hat trick of letting it slip away. But it's really good to see them be able to jag that win. And also, I was really surprised to see that's Monty Yanni's first try for the Rebels. It took him the 10 rounds to get there, but it's a credit to them. It's good to see them remaining competitive. And realistically, even if you look at the ladder and they're both out of that final 8 at the moment, the top 8 rather, they should be getting that win, the Rebels. They're a good enough team to go over to Auckland to play against Moana and get the win. I think they would have been very disappointed, and it would have really signalled that they're not ready for finals if you can't get those wins abroad. So I'm pleased for them. I'm more worried about Moana in general. It's a tough position for them to be in, and I look to who they've got on the sidelines, and I can't wait for them to have Sekope Kepu back in some kind of capacity, because we saw last year how influential he was for them at tight head. He's, one of your most decorated Waratahs of all time. He's a fantastic Wallaby prop. And I think they're really missing that leadership in the pack. And it goes a long way. When you look at the way that their set piece operates without Sekope, you can see that something's lacking, and it's probably that man.
Yep. Yeah, very well said. I think what we'll do is move into what in many ways was the I think in a broader sense, you could call this the match of the round. Two of the best teams coming up against each other, the Chiefs versus the Crusaders. And up until, again, the final moments of the game before Tyrone Thompson's try in the 79th minute, the scores were 27-24 to the Chiefs, and the Crusaders were banging down the door. It was an incredibly close game. Mitch, the Chiefs now go into this clearly the top team in the competition. What do you think it is about the Chiefs that make them such a dangerous team to come up against, and they're proving such a handful to both the Kiwi and the Aussie teams?
They just have this ability to score points whenever they from nothing. And we know that Kiwi teams in the past have always excelled through counterattack. But this Chiefs team is not only scoring through counterattack, but also setting up tries in the midfield, and their composure when it gets to those championship minutes late in the games when the game's on the line. They never look overawed by the occasion. They always look like they know what they need to do. They stick to their structures. One of their extremely talented backs pull something out. Damian McKenzie puts a little chip through, or just the things that they do is just there isn't a team at the moment that's coming close to them, and you can't shut them down. You shut down one of their players, and they've got 3 other players that are capable of making a break themselves. They just do things so well. The Crusaders played a very structured game, and were trying to shut them down by keeping the ball in close and trying to keep it in the set piece. And the Chiefs were like, "Nah, we'll turn it over and we'll spread it right, and we'll score a try, and we'll extend that lead." So they've done so well this season to be able to do that. And I don't see anyone coming close to them now that's probably going to take that victory. And 9 straight? We were talking about Moana not getting a win yet. These guys haven't taken a loss yet. So 9 from 9, incredible so far this season.
And I think that point that you described about the kind of willingness of the Chiefs to take risks and take opportunities, they've just been brave. And they were so brave within this game to be willing to throw the ball wide from turnover ball deep within our own half and carve up obviously a quality Crusaders team. And I think D-Mac has really come into his own this season, coming back into the Chiefs. I'd actually argue he's the form 10 of the competition, when you're including Moanga and Barrett in that picture. I'm not intentionally blowing air up him. I actually think he currently is. The question is kind of, where do you go in terms of kind of All Black 10s? Does he kind of get the nod over? Are they going to be keeping Moanga? How do you think kind of 10, 15, and then 22, Lockie, are going to be lining up for the All Blacks come the World Cup later in the year?
Oh, don't do that to me. I don't want to give them any airtime. The All Blacks get enough airtime of their own. But it's
an Aussie rugby podcast, guys.
You have to have D-Mac in that 23, right? He's been exceptional. And that's not an understatement. He has been exceptional. And he's come back from Japan a better player. He had a season in Suntory. It took them through to a final. They were unsuccessful, as we know, because Marika Koroibete beat them all up in the final for Wild Knights. But he is a fully formed utility player. He's come from that live wire, smaller, almost Cheslin Colby mould of a dynamic whippy player who can cover the back line. And now he is the form 10. He is. And he won't be there for the World Cup as the pivot. It'll be Richie Moanga. But he's just signed Damian McKenzie through to the end of 2025 with New Zealand Rugby. and Bowden Barrett and Richie Mo'unga are off. But we're seeing the future of the All Blacks playmaking structure, and it is Damien McKenzie. So it's exciting to see from a brand of rugby perspective how well he plays, but it's pretty ominous when you think that that's what could be directing the All Black ship for the next 2-3 seasons at a Bledisloe level. So we'll have to wait and see how it all pans out. But yeah, he's the form 10 at the moment for sure.
My only request in this entire situation is he never tries to grow a moustache, because I don't think he can do it well. But outside of that, all power to him. He is an incredible player. And actually,
this week, that
he's
little
one of those
mo that
players
he's trying to grow, that little mo when he's going for goal and he's doing his little smiling assassin little, smirk as he goes to line it up. It just looks wrong.
on him. Yep.
It looks horrible.
Yeah, he needs a blue card
sleazy.
check after that one.
Yep.
It comes sleazy. It's just like, he's such a great player. He's not a bad looking bloke either, but with the mo, nah, get rid of it.
No, he needs some lessons from Charlie Gamble in there. But why don't we move on now to the Reds versus the Force? So we're not.
We're going to talk about the Reds.
Still the Reds versus the Force.
They don't deserve any airtime, do they?
No.
How dare
no
you?
Need. So the Reds got up 31-17, and both of you guys were able to catch this game in full. I was in a tent camping with my eldest. I don't know. They're old.
One of them.
So, Lockie, starting with you, as the Reds fan, how do you rate this game? Obviously, you won, so you're going to be happy, but in terms of the team performance as a whole?
Well, as a game, it wasn't much to look back on, was it? It was a bit of a fizzer. There were lots of disallowed tries. There wasn't a lot of continuity. I thought the Reds, focusing on their attack, that was quite lateral as well. They didn't find their direction, save for, when they're in the 22 and they started hitting those tighter lines like Harry Wilson and Fraser McWright were hitting. But I didn't take a lot out of this game as a Reds fan and as an Australian rugby watcher, because it played out almost the way that you would expect, but without the intensity of two teams fighting for a position in the finals. It felt like something was lacking. I'm not sure what it was, but for mine, I'm coming out with more questions for the Reds and the Force than answers. It was a very disjointed game, and especially it boil it down to the end where the Reds have 90 seconds to play with and they don't go for a bonus point in the context of how tight that bottom three for the top 8 is. I found that totally bewildering, Mitch. What did you make of it?
Yeah, it was. I enjoyed watching that and listening to the Stan Sports guys try and process what the decision making was, trying to get in Liam Wright's head and be like, why would you go for the 3 here? Yes, you secure the win, but at the same time, you're not getting anywhere near a bonus point. And when the table is so congested, didn't make a whole lot of sense. They were dominant in that area of the field, in that facet of the game. Their line out and their mauls were punishing the Force there. So you would have expected them to probably go over and score the try. Not really sure what it was, whether it was just that brain, that rugby brains that Simon Cron likes to talk about, or whether it's just a team, again, like we're starting to see a lot in the bottom sort of half of the table or more, 6th place up, there's that gap that's starting to appear in the table. But every team below that is so starved of wins at the moment that teams are just craving to get that. They just want to get the win on the board, and so to sort of in some ways salvage their season, that maybe that's the only thing I can think of. The Reds were like, let's just bank this, get the points, make sure we get the win. Let's not give any hope of trying to steal this from.
Well, the game started off quite quickly with Zach Kiribiji running away for a try, getting a double again. He has been on absolute fire this season. Michael Wells also got in the meat pies for the Force, but we had Fraser McWright with a first half double, denied a hat trick twice. Matty Faisler got on a board with George Blake as well. It brings us to an interesting question which is popping up, and I think will be a really good one for us to talk through. And again, Lockie, I'm going to throw this to you as the resident Reds fan to try and overcome the dual Waratahs bias that's here. But we have Fraser Fraser McWright, who is in incredible form as the Reds' number 7. We have Michael Hooper, who has the decade-plus experience at the top level, ex-Wallabies captain, and is coming back into a bit more of the form and the best of what we're seeing. Is currently on form Fraser McWright better than Michael Hooper?
Yes. That's a simple answer. He is. He is the better 7 on form. And I don't think anyone can deny that. But when we're looking at a World Cup year, we're not looking about exclusively Super Rugby form. We look at what you bring to all the Wallaby squad. We look at your World Cup experience. We look at the amount of situations that you've been in and been able to execute as well. And for all Fraser McWright's upside, he does not have the experience of Michael Hooper. And I would be very surprised if the gold jersey is Fraser's for the season to start. I would expect Michael Hooper to be there. He's in Eddie's leadership team that we've seen with the likes of Slips and Ala Alatoa and Nick White and Andrew Kellaway from what we could see from those pictures from Wallaby camp, and maybe Jed Holloway. So there's a strong group that's formed. And I would be very, very surprised if it's not Michael Hooper in the gold 7. That being said, if Fraser McWright's not on the bench, I would be very surprised and very disappointed, because with Michael Hooper, we are wanting to manage him, at least from what I can see through the spring tour, his return from last year. Now, I would rather see Michael Hooper play 50 minutes out of his absolute skin and then see Fraser McWright wreak havoc and vice versa. There's a world in which we can tandem 2 7s like that. So maybe that's the path going forward. But to my mind, the gold 7 is Hooper's until he's done and dusted after the World Cup.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point there, because having McWright on the bench would then necessitate a pretty versatile back row, somebody who is able to fill in at lock if required, somebody who can fill in at 6. So having those players that are kind of the 6 lock hybrid that we know that Eddie loves, having a few of them in and around the picture to compensate for a pure fetcher being on the bench. But Mitch, would you agree with that take that at this point in time, Fraser McWright is the form 7 between both McWright and Hooper?
Yeah, I think out of the two, you can't go past Fraser McWright. I guess the involvement that he has on the game and the impact that he has. 2 tries this week, 2 more that disallowed. Michael Hooper didn't cross the line once for the Waratahs this week. And aside from that, you look at the other stats, like the runs, the tackles, the turnovers. Michael Hooper's having impacts, but he's not having that type of impact on the game. I agree completely with what Lockie's saying, though. When you look at the Wallabies, you can't be giving that open side flanker position to a player like McWright, who's had a handful of minutes at test level and has been really sort of underutilized in the test arena so far when we're so close to the World Cup. One thing that I have seen online of people talking about as a potential option for the back row is throwing Wilkin in there as well. What do you guys think of the idea of having Fraser McWright and Wilkin in like a 6-7 combination with Michael Hooper coming on for 30, 35 minutes and just leading it and securing the wins for us in the World Cup?
Lockie, you had a reaction there.
I'm a huge Wilkin fan. That's why I got excited. I had the misfortune, actually, you'll enjoy this, of playing against Brad Wilkin all through my school career. And he also played 7, which is where I played, and he consistently beat the stuffing out of me every occasion, whether it was through school or through the other external games that we'd play. He was phenomenal. He's a New South Wales boy, but he was boarding up at Iona College out in Wynnum on Brisbane's Bayside. And when he went through as a first 15 captain, his team went undefeated. So he's got a fantastic junior record. He did 7s. He did TARS juniors for a while, under 20s rep. He's just been hampered by injury. And he's really the forgotten flanker of this generation that's come through. We've seen everyone rave about, who's after the George Smiths and the Hoopers, who fills that legacy. And I feel like Brad Wilkin is really the smoky when it comes to World Cup selection as how we can fit in. But if we look at his record this year alone, after going away with Australia A and performing really well in Japan, he's come in as captain of the Rebels. And many of these games, he has been dragging that team through as a leader and as a 7. So for mine, he's a really impressive player, and one that if there wasn't this lockstep of established 7s, we'd be picking him in a World Cup squad. I can't see it happening this time around with the amount of back rowers and the amount of specialists that we've got. But he does loom as a prospect for the likes of a Lions tour around the corner. And from what we've seen of the Rebels this year, Ando, would you agree that he is a Form 7 as well?
He is one of them. I don't agree with the idea of having him and McWright in the same starting 15. Just no. Just absolutely
light
no
on.
in my mind. They both fulfill the same role. Yeah, too light on, but also in terms of line-out impact that could have as well, depending upon your 8 option, because you'd want someone who's a bigger, heavier ball runner to compensate for the light on factor with those two at 6 and 7, which means there wouldn't be a jumping option.
Throw him up in the line-out, though.
I don't think the balance would work. Yeah, but not too often. Like, he's not going to be a regular line-out target, unless I'm wrong and someone has the stats to prove me wrong on that, which you're welcome to. But he's not a good line-out option as someone like Liam Wright or Jed Holloway at 6 or Ned Hannigan at 6. Like, there's a big difference between someone who can get thrown up for one catch every couple of games.
At the moment,
dude, he's been playing 6 for the Wallabies for the last 2 years.
Under Eddie, we don't know what Eddie's going to do. We don't know. What he's gonna do.
We know Eddie likes double fetch from the World
Thanks
Cup
for doing
non-sequiturs
on what I was saying. This is true. Yeah, and see how that went for us. But anyway, look, Wilkin definitely post-World Cup picture is going to be in the equation. But yeah, he's just not going, in my mind. He won't be a part of the team.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. Yeah, I don't think that this change happens pre-World Cup. But I'm fully expecting Michael Hooper to step away from definitely the Wallabies and maybe even Super Rugby next year. And he's out of the picture completely. So then we need to look at who's that next player coming through. And don't forget, we've got Charlie Gamble, who becomes eligible in a few weeks' time, I think, for Australia as well. So he's another player that's putting his hand up. I guess the only the suggestion with that is that he's had such an injury-ravaged season so far this year, and he's not able to get consistent minutes on the park for the Waratahs, that you don't think that he deserves to be picked over both Wilkin or McWright, even if we were picking Wallaby squad for post-World Cup.
Yeah, I would agree. So I think we've spoken about that enough. It's interesting to hear from both of you that, McWright, form 7, interesting. I like that, and both pretty bold and confident in that prediction and selection. So well done.
Before we move off this game, though, the one thing I wanted to ask Lockie, what were your thoughts on Pataya's performance this week? We've seen in the last few weeks that he's had good performances in that 15 position, and this week I didn't think he seemed to struggle for mine. He lost a fair bit of ball. Didn't end up managing to ground it with Hegarty coming across and cover defense. Not one of his more dominant performances.
No, I'd agree with that, Mitch. And in fairness, I think Pattaya is still finding his feet as a 15. He's been almost a very different player to Reece Hodge, but almost played in a similar way that his versatility can be his undoing, that the Reds have been able to put him in across really from 13, 11, 14 and fullback and just to see what happens. So I'll give him some more time to figure out where in the back three he's best suited. But for mine, I'm a Jock Campbell fan in 15 with the Reds. I think he's a really consistent, safe pair of hands as a playmaker, and Pattaya has the ability and the razzle to be able to inject himself as a dynamic winger in the mould of Marika. So that's where I see the Reds pushing for down the track. But, I mean, Pattaya's ceiling is stratospheric. I mean, we've seen the footwork that he's got. Once he develops his kicking game and is able to have those really secure moments as a fullback, we can see him be a viable option. But yeah, you're right. It wasn't his best game. I don't think that's going to be happening all the time, though. He's still young. What is he, 22, 23? Like, we've got a decade of Jordan Pattaya to find his feet. And when he does, he's going to be a pretty scary prospect.
I often forget how young he is. Like, he made his Wallabies debut in the last World Cup at 18 or something, and even then too young to really probably justifiably be there. And the fact that he's been around so long, you kind of forget how old he is. The other point I have on this one before we move off is James O'Connor at 12. The Reds looked really good and dominant in the first half, and when he went off at halftime due to that illness that he wasn't able to kind of see out the rest of the half, things kind of fell away, and they definitely didn't look as cohesive, particularly in the back line. Do you think that 12 is the position that the Reds need to be playing Jock at for the rest of the season?
Personally, yes, I love Jock at 12. I think he's really dynamic through the centres. He's able to use his stepping and running game more. He's not locked in as that distributor. And I think if we're going to develop from a Queensland perspective the likes of Tom Lyon, or if we want to bring Lawson Crichton through as that utility playmaker, having a Connor at 12 is a really stabilising influence. So while we've got the injuries to Paisami and Isaac Henry and these players who are still developing, both physically and as Super Rugby and some of them Wallaby players, having Jock at 12 is a great way to glue that backline together. So I'm a huge fan of that. Yeah.
Cool.
Can I move on? Are we good?
Yes. Now we can move on from the Reds.
We're good, Mitchell? All right. Thank you. All right. So why don't we move now to the match of the week? And I'm going to turn it over to Lockie. You are taking this section, my friend.
Yes, and what a fantastic game if you're a rugby fan, but if you're an Aussie rugby fan only, it was crushing to see our brightest and best in the Brumbies, and that is objectively, they are our brightest and best, go over across to the capital, an equally cold and windy and miserable place, and eventually go down in really, really trying circumstances. We saw a lot of toing and froing. We saw some really blockbuster highlight reels from the likes of Nick Frost, stretching the legs. But aside from the big man in space and his speed, what do we take away from this game and seeing our highest ranked side go down to a Hurricane side that has also been performing pretty strongly? Ando, we'll start with you.
Yeah, look, it was really frustrating in that it would have been great to have the narrative of 3 Aussie wins in a row over Kiwi opposition. Now, 2 of those would have come from the Highlanders being beaten, but that's okay. So, unfortunately, we weren't able to continue that narrative. But look, it wasn't a bad performance. And you look back and watch the game, and they certainly weren't outgunned. I think that because they've got a couple of injuries to a couple of key players at the moment, if they'd had their full team, I think they could have come away with the win.
Mitch, how about you, mate? What did you take out of this game, and were there positives in a loss for the Brumbies?
I need to ask you boys where we want to go with this. Now, there's a few contentious calls that were made in this game, and a lot of people on Twitter are sort of up in arms around some of the decisions, some of the tries that were allowed to be awarded, some of the sneakiness of the New Zealanders going unseen yet again. So do we want to dive into that a little bit, or do you want to just stick to the rugby and talk about where the Brumbies didn't really excel as we
Mate, definitely dive into it. I've got 2 salty moments ready. So, Lockie, I'm taking over your cut, mate.
Do it. I want to hear the salt. I want to feel the pain in the voice.
Okay. So, firstly, I might start with the latter infringement or issue. You remember how, who was it? Ryan Smith got pinged for holding back somebody, just like hardly touching the shirt and holding them back. And supposedly that stopped a try. And so they got disallowed. Well, buddy, watch the 68th minute try to Aidan Morgan and watch Duplessis Karifi come up the side of the scrum and just hold Luke Reimer across and hold him back. And then Reimer is the one who's meant to be filling the gap that Morgan goes through to get the try. And Reimer arrives late because he's had to push bloody Karifi off him, who's not allowed to be holding on to him. And clearly it's obstruction, like without a shadow of a doubt. Now, that probably happens in a lot of games, but when we've got the precedent set earlier in the season with Ryan Smith getting called for it, it was clearly...
I think this instance...
him being held back. So
say what you will about this happening in like any game of rugby. This instance is far worse than the Ryan Smith incident. Were they playing?
I can't remember who that Reds game was against. It was earlier in the season, so it's kind of like fallen from my mind with all the rugby we've watched since then.
Okay, so regardless of who it was and what game it was, the defender in that instance was going the complete wrong way. They had chosen the wrong way to go, and they were sort of turning around when Ryan Smith made contact, which stopped them, in quotations, making the tackle. This one was blatant, and in no instance is this allowed to happen in rugby. from a scrum, there's no way that the number 7 is allowed to make contact with the opposition at all. So the fact that that's not even looked at, completely missed, not even reviewed by the TMO, 2 touchies. I can understand the ref missing it because he's on the ball, but I just don't understand how that is allowed to be played on. I don't get it. There's no world where that should be allowed to happen.
No, of course not. And at the end of the day, it's that dark arts part of it, isn't it? It's the 6s and the 7s over in New Zealand where they cook them up in the pot and pull them out of the embryonic fluid like some kind of Lord of the Rings situation. But they're always dastardly. And it's very...
It's not even dark arts, is it? It's clear and obvious. It's not dark arts. It's not like you're pushing the ball out the side of a ruck when no one can see how it pops out. It's obviously obstruction. Like, come on. That's played in Canberra.
In the game
no doubt that gets called up.
If it's happening during the game, if this has happened in a previous instance, why wouldn't Griffey keep doing it? It's pushing those boundaries, and that's what the Kiwis have been so successful at doing for such a long period of time, is pushing it and playing the whistle. So if we go back through the game and see, I'd wager there's an instance or two where Griffey's got his hands on and he's testing the waters to see whether the ref's got eyes on. For mine, it's illegal, yes, but it's very good heads-up footy from Griffey to be able to identify that the referee doesn't have eyes on that. And Reimer's got every right to be pissed because I am for him and I would be in his position.
I just don't get it. Like, how... I don't know. I'm lost for words. What about the other one, Endo? Run us through the other one in the... What was it? The 9th minute, was it? No.
Was that the one to Devon Flanders or Artie
The
Sevilla? I remember the moment.
Minute, the Sevilla try from the Omua, straight throw at the line out that was
the Sevilla try. I mean, look, that's
goal.
Just blatantly obvious. Yeah, like Omua throwing it in, it goes directly to like the chest, or if I'm being major salty, left hand like side of Artie Sevilla, who then takes a couple of steps and pass it back to Omura. That was fine. That was backwards. But the throw in itself, in no way, shape, or form was straight or contestable. Like at all. And so you look at both of those, and it's just too clear and obvious errors, fouls, penalties, which have resulted directly in Kane's tries that you just go, oh, come on. The Hurricanes at home are hard enough as it is outside of getting those calls. But look, to be honest, the Brumbies were still in the game despite these opportunities, and they just need to be better to take refereeing calls out of the equation. So I think that's
and
it.
to balance out the ledger a little bit, so we're not just sitting here bagging the referee and saying that it was all against the Brumbies. In fairness, there was an incident where Tom Wright takes a run, gets tackled over the sideline, and then stands up and literally chucks the ball to this guy that's like on the sideline banging the drum, so that the Hurricanes couldn't take a quick line out, and that's a penalty offence, and the referee did nothing about it either. So there were a few things missed there, just a bit of rugby shithousery basically from both sides that got sort of let go.
I think that phrase just about sums up most of the games from this week. It's bang on. But I mean, I think to sum up this game, if I may, and try and regain a little bit of control of the segment that was lost, the Brumbies really will take confidence. And if they play the Hurricanes again, I'd wager that they'll dust them, because despite those calls going against them, and despite the late one in particular, that Morgan try, I think the Brumbies were well in a position not only to win this game, but to win well. We saw a couple of kicks go astray. If we had those 4 to 6 points on, they're a winning side overseas. And how good are we talking up the Brumbies if they bag a win in the capital against the Hurricanes? So let's look forward to the Brumbies continuing, hopefully, to be successful from an Aussie perspective. And really that litmus test for mine comes when they take on the Chiefs in a couple of weeks, Ando.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that's going to be really the biggest match. The Chiefs have been absolutely incredible. Pitagus Suakula is just... He would just scare me in terms of just how defined his beard is and how amazing, and like he's just a specimen of masculinity. not masculine, he's just a specimen of a human being. And he brings this physicality and dynamism that so many other teams are just going to have to struggle to deal with. The Chiefs have been on fire, and I pity anybody coming up against them in the next few weeks.
Yeah, we'll see the Highlanders next week, right?
They're stuffed. They're just absolutely stuffed. Well, team, is there anything else, Lockie? Is there anything you wanted to finally say for this match of the round? I mean, the Brumbies are still second on 32 points. Chiefs are out in front on 40. The Canes are third on 31, Blues 30 points, and then Crusaders on 28. Then there's a massive drop off to the Reds on 19 in sixth place. So anything final for this match, my friend?
Big props to the Stones on Ryan Lonergan for coming back and taking that penalty at the end. I thought that was a really big mark of the player and of the kicker. And I know you'll enjoy this, Ando, as one of his fans. But for him to shake off what was a pretty big misconversion in the scheme of the game, to be able to come back into it and say, nah, I've got this kick, drill it through. That's a bonus point that's kept them in second. Because if he doesn't kick that, they slide down to third on points difference and could be at a real risk of dropping out of the top four down the track if they don't jag that. So big props to him. I'm a fan as well. And hopefully that puts them in good stead for the next few weeks.
Yeah, Mitch, I need to ask, how are things coming along on the hunt to find me a giant face poster of Ryan Lonergan? You said you were looking into that for me. How's that
It's
coming
hit
along?
a few roadblocks, not going to lie. Not getting a whole lot of responses from Brumbies HQ at the moment, but I'll keep my ear to the ground and I'll keep pushing. We'll see what we can work out for you, mate. Don't worry.
All right, good to know. Yeah, please. That'd be very much appreciated. I've got some space on the wall behind me here. I think it would go perfectly. Just have him watching over my shoulders as we do this pod. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have reached the end of the pod. Can I please remind you that we have the interview with Izzy Parisi coming on straight after this. So stick on the pod. You'll hear from him really, really soon, and he talks through some really interesting stuff about some of the challenges that the team has faced in how they're kind of communicating, connecting together, as well as his instant reaction to the win over the Highlanders as well. So it has been a load of fun. If you happen to be up in Townsville or able to do a bit of travel, make sure you get up for the Super W final next Saturday. It will be a cracking game between the Fijiana Drua and the Queensland Reds. So hope it's going to be an incredible match. Mitch, thank you. Lockie, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and we'll catch you later. Bye.
See you, everyone. Bye.